Hello, my name is Jay Gilligan. Welcome to my masterclass. It's titled The Perfect Trick, Creating Juggling for Performance. I've been juggling for 35 years, and one of my first shows was when I was 8 years old. I had just learned how to ride the unicycle and juggle 3 balls. It was at the National Unicycle Convention, and it was a competition. But I could only do one trick on the unicycle. I could ride in a circle over and over again, turning to the right. But my parents had a great idea. They made my brother hold a piñata dangling from a stick, and they gave me another stick with which I could take a whack at the piñata every time I rode by it, riding in that circle. And when I eventually broke the piñata, there was the bonus of being able to throw the candy at the judges as a bribe. And after I did that, I picked up 3 balls in the unicycle, I did a few throws of cascade while riding, and then I dropped a ball, and then I fell off, and that was the end of the performance. But since then, I performed in 34 countries. I've worked for Cirque du Soleil and the Seven Fingers, but I've also created over 100 original performances of my own. Full-length shows, 100 so far in my career. And so to get started, we first need to talk about some more of my thoughts on what exactly is juggling that we're going to create, and what exactly do I mean by performing. I want to talk about some of my experiences with these things so you can put my comments here in context. You don't have to agree with what I say, but you just need to understand what I'm saying so you can make your own opinion. It's like if my friend comes to my show and says to me, what you did was boring, and I've known that friend for 20 years, I have a common language with that person to understand what he means when he says it's boring. I know exactly what he's trying to say, and maybe in what way that it's boring, and what to do about that comment, how to even process it. Whereas maybe if somebody off the street, a stranger comes in, I've never met them before, and they say, hey, that show you did, that was a little bit boring. I don't know what that means. It could mean the show was too long. It could mean there was not enough yodeling. I have no idea. So I think it's important to establish a little bit of a relationship so that people's ideas can be taken in context. And again, it's not about agreeing with me that I have the right answer or that there is a right or wrong answer, but it's more to share my experiences with you so that you can think about what I'm saying and hopefully spark some ideas in your own life with what you're working on. And hopefully you can get to know me a little bit better in the process. So I'd like to talk about some of the choices I've made over the years, all these years of performing juggling. And you're going to discover that the answers, these questions, that they reflect the ideas, maybe you've never considered them before. I've encountered so many problems over so many years of juggling. I've had to solve so many random situations I never dreamed about when I started juggling. So I'd like to share some of that process, some of that struggle with you, and maybe bring up some ideas or some circumstances or some details that you never considered before or were even aware that maybe even existed. So I've had a lot of years to think really deeply about these things, and I've discovered a lot of things that I wish I would have known when I was starting out. So hopefully some of these thoughts in this masterclass will connect with you and help you out along your way. I think when we start talking about creating juggling for performance, let's first talk about what performing is. We'll get to the juggling in a little bit, but because performing can be many, many different things. You can have any style of performing. As many different ways there are to juggle, with as many different props, there's also that many ways, and even more to do performing. Because performing, you can combine not just juggling on its own, but you can combine it with any other type of performing you want. So we have to talk about a little bit what it means to perform. What is a performance? And in a really simple way, without getting too deeply philosophical, in an easy conversation, if we can agree for the moment to move forward, We can say that a performance, it's anytime you're in a situation where someone is watching you in a formalized way. But formal, it's kind of a scary word. It sounds very serious. But all I mean is that we're not talking about formal in the way that there's money changing hands. Nobody has to get paid for there to be a performance, or there's some sort of prestige. It's more just that there's an agreement between two people. It can be that simple. There's an agreement. And normally, there's someone who's showing something and someone who's watching. And then, once you've kind of established that that's going to happen, you can try to agree on what level you're going to have this performance. It can be really casual. You can be in your kitchen and your friend comes to visit you and you say, hey, I've been working on this trick. Do you want to see this trick? That's a performance. That's great. But that you ask and you have an agreement there. Hey, do you want to see a trick? And then they say yes. Or even if they say no, there's still the context there that, well, you show them anyway. But it's established that there's going to be a performance. And there's a context that people can process and be familiar with and understand what's happening. So you could also, on the other end of it, you're not in your kitchen, you're in Madison Square Gardens, and you have 50 million people stretched out in front of you. Obviously, that can be a performance as well, and you can be getting paid millions and millions of dollars. And you can be super famous, and you can get a lot of extra energy coming out of your performance that lasts beyond the performance. So there's that whole spectrum between being in your kitchen and Madison Square Gardens, and that's a lot of stuff to try to talk about. Obviously, it's impossible. But still, even though you have that range of possibilities, there are a lot of common factors conceptually that covers all those things. A lot of details that we can dive into that will apply, maybe not to every single situation, but to many of them. And hopefully then, wherever you fit in that spectrum of performing, you can definitely find something here to grab onto and use. When you have a performance, we generally have these two roles, somebody who's going to show something and somebody who's going to watch. That doesn't necessarily mean that the audience always has to be the person who's just passively watching. Of course, the audience can also be the people who are creating the action. It can be a script that they're following or a situation that's been set up that they play out, they act out a role, or some sort of situation where they have to take action, follow instructions, or it's some sort of structured improvisation, it's some sort of immersive theater, and they're gonna activate the space and all these other buzzwords. And still in that situation, there is a creator. There's a creator who instigated that situation, who set up that moment, and allowed the audience to take action. So we still have a creator who's one step ahead, who's premeditated what's going to happen. So even in that case, if they're not the one doing the action themselves, they still have a little bit of control. Even if the control is to set up a situation where they have no control, it's just complete chaos, you've still considered and you've intended for that to happen. So it doesn't matter what's your context for performing. If you're focusing on pure traditional technical juggling to music, traditional circus, speed juggler, if you want to perform in Las Vegas or a cruise ship, a cabaret act in Germany on the stages there, a palazzo dinner theater, a 6-minute long act, or if you want to have a speaking act and you want to tell jokes, you want to do comedy, you want to do character work, you want to have an entire 45-minute show you're going to do on a cruise ship. Or also you could be doing a contemporary circus piece. You could be dancing while juggling or doing a lot of physical movement, physical theater. You could be singing, you could be storytelling, doing mime, puppetry, all these other sorts of disciplines, other circus disciplines. You could combine juggling with trampoline, juggling with acrobatics. And of course, then you can start to multiply the number of performers on stage. There's so many possibilities, but there's still a lot of core concepts that's relevant between all of them, that connects all of them to this idea of what it means to have a performance, to give a performance, and to watch a performance or experience a performance. And we're going to dive into all of that coming up. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is the idea of what makes a performance good. Because here we are in a master class, and sure, it's nice to sit here and just talk about, oh, here's all the different possibilities. You could be in your kitchen, you could be in Germany in a cabaret, you could be on a cruise ship, you could be at Carnegie Hall. But we're here to learn, or at least progress somehow in our process. We're here to try to do better. And hopefully, through this process of spending time with me, we are going to progress forward, we are going to get better, and we're going to find these ideas that will take us to where we want to go next. And part of that is we have to start to talk about, well, how do we even know that we're making progress? How do we know that we're getting better? How do we even know what's our goal? What are we trying to do? How are we trying to be better? And what is good? What is a good performance anyway? And so part of that is also, you could say in another way, not just is it good, but is it successful? We can use that word, success, instead of good or bad. Did you accomplish the goal you set out to achieve? And again, part of that is you have to just be aware of what is that goal you're trying to achieve. So there's a couple different sides to that. You can be obviously artistically successful. I mean, artistically, we can use the word artist or entertainer. It's the same thing. It means from the side of the creative side, the creation side, internally, did the performance accomplish what you wanted it to do? Did it make people laugh? Did it make people cry? Did it make people forget about their everyday life? Did it make people think? Did it inspire people? Or whatever. And of course, you're giving the audience an experience that's going to be relevant to whatever situation you're in. I mean, it can be commercially successful, or of course on the other side of it, with commercialism, we have this idea about getting paid for what we do. I mean, you can be also successful in a performance in terms of impressing the people who hired you, ensuring that you get hired again, making a lot of money. But there's also this idea that you can be successful with connecting with the audience. And again, on the other side of it, connecting with the audience generally means if you're being hired for a show, it's good for business as well, because the producer is going to take notice of that and say, oh, they were artistically successful or entertainingly successful, and that's going to lead to the next step on the business side as well. So I just want to say there are these couple different things to be aware of, right, in a performance, like how can a performance be good or successful? And you have the infrastructure of the system of how performances interact in this world, or how they exist in the world, in terms of politics and marketing and all these business things. And then you have the actual, it's kind of the external framework of the performance, and then you have the internal part, which is, okay, I wanted to accomplish X, Y, and Z with my work, with my performance in the show, and did that happen? And did people buy into it? Did they believe it? Were they with me? Was the audience with me? And did they appreciate what I did? So a lot of this idea about performing is in one way ingrained into the culture of juggling. I remember when I first learned to juggle, somebody taught me in person. I didn't learn from a book initially, though I did get juggling for the complete klutz. I think the next week after someone showed me the 3-ball cascade at one of the unicycle conventions in the summer. And I was learning to juggle 3 balls, and they said, throw 1 ball back and forth, and then you throw 2 balls, you do the exchange. And after a while I could do that, and they said take 3 balls, and I did my first 3-ball flash, threw each ball and caught it, 3 catches. And then they said, and now don't forget to smile. And of course at the time I was like, yeah, that's right, I gotta remember to smile. And of course in the context of that moment, I understand what they mean. It means that now you've accomplished this, but maybe there's more to do as well. Like you made a great step forward, but there's more work to do. I mean, if I'm being generous, that's like a really nice way to take that comment. But the other way to think about it too is that there's this idea that it's implied that juggling is inherently meant as some sort of performance where also along the way of learning how to juggle, it's implied you're obviously gonna perform it. I mean, why would I smile if I was never gonna show anybody? So there's a couple of assumptions being made. Number one, that after I learn to do the physical act of juggling, well, I'm gonna put it in front of someone else, and I'm gonna create the situation where someone's gonna watch me do that. And then also number two, there's a certain way that you need to present juggling to someone watching you, which is that you should smile and be happy. And that juggling takes on this cultural role, which of course it does in our lives. We have this deeply ingrained relationship to juggling in our larger world culture, that juggling is something that's probably happy and and funny and exciting and alive. And of course you would maybe express those things through smiling. So it's not, it's not completely crazy, but it is something that you need to realize. It's really good to realize at some point that juggling is just a thing. It's just a physical skill. It's not a performance. Juggling is, if we take the 3-ball cascade, right? It's just moving your arms back and forth, and then the balls trace the shape in the air. It's not performing. It's literally a physical action. The same way as tying your shoes is a physical action. And we have this deep assumption that juggling automatically means performing, and it absolutely doesn't. And we need to first realize that so we can have a clear vision going forward with what we're trying to accomplish. I think it does us a lot of good if the starting point is that juggling is not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to perform juggling. You don't take that for granted. So the starting point is even one step back from learning to juggle in terms of performing. You say, okay, I'm going to do a performance, and then I'm going to use juggling, or I am going to tie my shoe. That can be a performance, or whatever you want to do, chopping wood. I mean, you're moving an object through space with your body. It's the same as juggling in terms of the physicality of what's actually happening, in terms of relationship of, well, its relevance to performing. Though I will give you that juggling has two really good qualities to it that do help it when you do want to use it into performing, at least as a starting point. These are two qualities that it's very easy to talk about. Of course, juggling is visual, so that's nice because when you use it in a performance, other people can see it. And the way that you experience juggling normally as an audience is that you see it. So juggling is a visual activity. I'll give you that. And in fact, it's, again, to use my stupid example of tying your shoes, I would say that juggling is more visual probably than tying your shoes. At least it's taking up a larger physical space. So maybe you can even start to say that it's just more visible, inherently in its basic technique. It's definitely more kinetic, probably, unless you have a really fun way to tie your shoes. I don't know. I'm not so good at tying. I just know one way to tie my shoes, I have to say. And so the other thing is that juggling, besides being visual, is that it takes some sort of skill. And it's not a skill that we normally possess in our daily lives, at least in our culture here. And there's been obviously different cultures from around the world, from the history of juggling, from different areas of the world where juggling is more or less ingrained and woven into the fabric of daily life. Some cultures, they could juggle the nuts from the trees in a more ceremonial fashion, but woven into the practices of their culture. Diablo is deeply ingrained in some different cultures. Children play with Diablos. It's not perhaps a different sort of skill, whereas maybe 3-ball cascade is a different sort of skill. In terms of the relationship to daily life. So we can say that juggling does possess not only the visual quality, but this idea of a skill, and that the skill sometimes can impress people and hold their attention. Hopefully, if that is your intention and you want that to, if you want that to happen, there's definitely the possibility there that juggling has this idea that it's a unique skill that maybe not everybody possesses, or even if they do possess it, they can still relate to your skill and maybe the time you've invested into learning that skill and there can be a connection there. Either they're impressed, or they can respect it, they can give respect, or they can give their attention to it, because there is some sort of human skill going on there, besides it being visually pleasing. But just to repeat, I don't think we want to assume that juggling automatically means performing, and this idea that if you're juggling at some point, you will of course do a show, because, well, otherwise, why would you be learning how to juggle? And that's a whole other topic maybe to dive into one day, which is that we have this history of juggling, and it comes from the circus, and then it escapes the circus into a more hobbyist culture, and how that whole journey went. I mean, at one point, most likely there wasn't people who learned to juggle for fun and didn't do a show. Like, that was the whole point of learning the juggles, because you were in this lineage of performers, and you were the next generation, and you're learning to juggle because you're gonna do a show. But nowadays we have people who learn to juggle, and they just juggle for fun, and it's not a trade secret. It's not hidden anymore in these family apprentice, master apprentice relationships. It's out in the open, and well, it's all over the internet, and we all share these ideas with each other openly. So nowadays we definitely have this possibility to learn to juggle without any intention to perform. And this masterclass, like all of the teaching that I do in my life for the past, 15 years, it's about consciousness of what you're doing. So there's no right or wrong answer, but it's more just about simply being aware of the choices that you're making, and especially being aware of the choices that you're not making, because you're not aware that was a choice you were making. But this idea we have of consciousness. And it's also about, what assumptions do you have? What traditions are you coming from or relating to? What state of mind do you have in relationship to your work? And it's about uncovering all these invisible decisions that you never put time into examining. So a good friend of mine, BJ Joyer, he said, Jay, you're always asking the questions that nobody's thinking of. And I think that was it was a very nice thing he said. But yeah, trying to think about these questions. What is a throw? What is a catch? We have all these assumptions. It's the same thing. Catch the balls, 1, 2, 3, and now smile. It's just an assumption. You're going to do a show. Well, okay, what is a throw? Well, that's a stupid question. Why would I waste time on that? I know what a throw is. Okay, well, I've had a lot of good fun in my life thinking about what is a throw and what is a catch. And it's not just all philosophical. These processes of working through my assumptions and these traditions and habits that I've formed over my 35 years of juggling, it's really opened up a lot of new ideas and a whole new world for me in terms of taking these philosophical journeys and turning them into concrete realities that actually do affect the work. They actually affect the technique of the juggling itself, and they actually affect the performance in a concrete way, not in just a metaphorical way. For example, I spent 1 year of my life, I think it was 1996, trying to figure out what's the difference between juggling balls with my arms crossed with my right hand over my left, or what's the difference between my left hand over my right? Like, wait, is it the same thing? Is it different? Why could it be different, or why should it be different? And I mean, yeah, it sounds silly, right? Well, your arms are crossed. Who cares? It's the same. Well, you're right-handed or you're left-handed. Maybe that makes a difference. But in the end, I made up over 100 tricks, 100 new tricks, 100 new patterns with 3 balls that I had never made before. But in trying to contemplate, is there a pattern that necessitates exactly that it's this way or this way? I don't think I succeeded, but I succeeded in having a process and a journey that resulted in a bunch of really tangible, concrete results that I can hold on to still even today. I do some of those tricks even today. So this idea of consciousness, it's uncovering all these things that are normally intuitive and that we don't spend time on. And sure, it can be fun to sit around like now and talk philosophy and conceptual ideas about juggling. I mean, when you've been juggling as long as I have, you tend to dive deeper and deeper into the work, to find new inspiration and new energy to keep going, right? So that's super fun. But for me, juggling is a physical activity. Like I said, it's a visual art form. And so I like that the ideas don't just stay theoretical, but they actually manifest themselves in reality with the actual physical movements, the actual work itself. So yeah, this idea that before consciousness, we use our intuition, and that's great. I mean, in the end, at the end of the day, your intuition is what's driving the process. We strive for consciousness, but again, without getting too philosophical, you can only be aware up to a certain point. And this idea of inspiration and creation, we can prepare as best we can. And at some point, if we dig down deep enough, it really does come down to your intuition or your gut feeling. That doesn't mean your intuition or your gut feeling is completely random. It means you're basing it on your experiences. And so there is a way that we can practice to make our intuition better. A simple way to do that is just to practice making choices and how you observe the world. So there's a lot to be said about that. I remember when I was young, when I was a teenager, I got really good advice from a fellow juggler. And he said, when you're trying to learn a new trick, a lot of times we get frozen in action because we're trying to think about, okay, the pattern has to be like this, and you can't comprehend it yet because you can't do the trick. It's too new, it's not inside your body, you don't have the skills yet, you don't have the experience yet to even understand what you're doing wrong. It's just it's completely overwhelming. And so a lot of times I know you kind of start to go into your head and you think, oh, okay, I'm going to throw there and then I'm going to throw there. Because in the moment, it's all happening too fast. I mean, gravity, the speed of gravity is constant, right? So you can't slow down time. And so a lot of times it would lead to some sort of inaction, like you hold the balls and you before you throw, you try to already think what's going to go wrong. And my friend said, you can't fix something that doesn't exist. And I'm so grateful that he said that, and I'm so glad I remembered it still today. And what it means is just go ahead and make the mistakes. Go ahead and throw the balls and just drop all of them. Go ahead and try the trick and fail miserably. Because then at least you can start to pick up the thread and the trail of the process of how you're going to fix those mistakes. But if you don't even know what the mistakes are before you start, how can you fix them? You can only start to visualize every infinite way things can go wrong, and of course that's an impossibility to prepare for. So when you're learning technique, it's the same thing as practicing to have more experience with your intuition in terms of making choices and observing the world. In terms of, you just want to say in the moment, I'm going to go there. You're going to take a direction and you're going to see what happens, and it's going to be good or bad or somewhere in the middle. It doesn't matter, but something's going to happen. You're not frozen by indecision. So I really like this idea that you can start to practice to become more aware of your intuition, or at least have an intuition that's stronger, that comes out more often. And one of the ways I like to do that is just practice making choices, just say yes and no all the time. And getting a little bit ahead of myself, but into creating juggling, it's a really easy process to have in the studio. If you're trying to make a new piece of juggling, instead of standing there and again trying to conceive into the future and think, okay, that's going to go like that, so then if that goes like that, but is that good or is that bad? No, it should rather go there, but if it goes there, it's like playing a game of chess and trying to think 10 moves ahead. Instead of doing that and being frozen by indecision or self-doubt, instead of doing that, you just take action and you just say, okay, I'm going to try this. And then you say, do I like that? And then you just go yes or no. And you don't have to sit there and agonize about it. You just, oh man, do I like that? Maybe I'd like it better if it was behind the back. No, it should be under the leg. I like that better. You don't have to care. You just try it and you say, I tried it. Do I like it? Yes or no? And if you say yes, then you can move on. And the cool thing about saying yes is maybe in the next hour, you don't have to say yes. You can change your mind all the time. Tomorrow you can say no. It's okay. But in the moment you make a choice. And if you do something and then you say yes or no and you say no, cool. Then you can fix it. Then you can say, okay, but why did I say no? Why do I not like this? Oh, it's because maybe the club goes a little bit low and I'm turning. Oh, okay, so the club should go higher and I could actually turn the other way, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. You just make quick choices in the moment. And yes, it's a laborious process because you can say no 100 times in a row. You can say, okay, I'm going to throw under the leg. Do I like it? No. Why? I shouldn't lift my leg there. Okay, how about behind the back? Do I like it? No. Why not? Well, because then if it's behind the back, then you have to look at it from the other side and whatever, right? And you say no, and that can be a really long process. But at least in my experience and the way I like to work, it's much better to be moving forward all the time. Even if those answers are negative, you're still gathering momentum towards the solution at some point. And so it can be a long process of saying no a lot, but I still find it to be a lot faster to take all that energy and that time to say no a lot until you get the yes, as opposed to just standing there frozen with indecision, not trusting your intuition or not exercising your intuition and trying that your intuition is going to guide you someplace good. So I like this idea of practicing and making choices, and also about this idea of uncovering what is unconscious and achieving some level of consciousness in our work. It's just about how you observe the world around you. So for example, if I go to a performance these days, if I'm bored by what's happening on stage exactly, or what's supposed to be happening, and it's not grabbing my attention, I'm never bored. I'll count the number of lights in the theater. It's like, wow, they're lighting the entire show with 8 lights. That's pretty cool. I would have thought you'd need more lights. Or you go to a Cirque du Soleil show and you're just like, wow, I can count, over 200 lights from just sitting where I am right here in the space. And then that's crazy. And always just trying to look at the details and the mechanics of what's happening. And for me, that hasn't destroyed the magic of performing, of watching performances, or the magic of juggling. It's made me even more impressed when I start to find out that these things that are happening are human, and they are because of a reason. It's not a mystery. Oh, there are 8 lights to light that entire show. Okay, that's pretty crazy. When there is magic then on stage, it makes it even more impressive that you start to uncover the mechanics by which those things happen. So for me, understanding and observing why certain moments work or why I like certain moments, it doesn't really take away from the magic of them. It only makes it stronger because I have this understanding that it's not unobtainable. It's just human. It's just like you and me. There's nothing more special or crazy going on. And for me, that makes it even more magical because, wow, if it's just like a person like us, and then look at that magical moment, that's even more impressive to me. There's no superpowers. There's no snap of the fingers and it just appears to be great. There's actually an idea, and there's hard work there, and there's care and respect for the process. So I really like to watch and notice all the details I can, and it really helps me to start to understand what I'm doing in my own process. So again, if I'm watching juggling and it's not my favorite show that I'm watching or my favorite performance that I'm seeing, then I can just start to notice, okay, in which objects are the objects, in which order are the objects moving? Okay, that ball only gets thrown every 3 beats. Oh wow, what an effect that causes. Okay, but I noticed that club, it's just been under the arm for like the past 30 seconds and hasn't even been touched. And you start to just be aware on a deeper level of what's going on. And another part of that too is I really like to tell myself what I like and what I don't like. So if I'm watching something, I'll say, man, I really like that. But the good tip is that you don't stop there and say, well, this is just what I like. You say, I like it because of what? So there's one extra step there that until you can get a concrete word that you can work with. Oh, I really like that moment at the end of the show. It was super cool, or whatever language we just use casually all the time. Yeah, but why was it cool? And you say, wow, I just felt great. I mean, there's all these kind of general words that don't help you out so much. But if you keep asking why and dig down to at least one concrete word where you say, well, it was great because all the lights and all the action stopped at the same time. And I go, synchronicity or rhythm or some sort of closing. Okay, that's cool. Maybe I should look at the end of my show. Does everything close together or whatever, right? So that you always drill down to what's the concept that's being worked with, and that you can eventually maybe play with that concept yourself. It doesn't always have to be a positive experience when you're watching something and thinking about your intuition and bringing things into the consciousness. I know a lot of times I'll have the best ideas for my shows when I'm watching a show I don't like, and then I can just sit there and watch the stage and I say, why are they doing it like that? They should do it like this. And then there's this moment where you go, wait a second, I can make my own show and I can do it however I want. And if I make my own show, I can do it like that. And so it's really fun sometimes to go see any sort of performance. If it's great, you're super inspired to go, again, work with those great concepts you observed. And if you're watching a show you don't like, you can also start to think more deeply and say, wow, I wonder what would happen if they did it differently. And then you would have your own chance to make it different. So there's a couple more things I'd like to share with you for this section of the talk. And this idea about consciousness there's a story about Sean McKinney and his costume back in the early 90s at the IJA festival. So this idea that consciousness means you're aware of the choices you make. And I love this story so much. I'm so glad that I got to experience this at such a young age. It really helped me out in my life. But basically, Sean McKinney came out at one of the IJAs and he had ripped up blue jeans and a white t-shirt. And he just did an incredible act. And I remember the judges kind of maybe scored him a little bit low in the competition or whatever, or he didn't win or something, second place or whatever. We were all the same age, me and my crew with Sean, all of us there. We were like, man, why didn't Sean win? And then the judges had said, well, he didn't have a costume. And just to say, in terms of this conversation here, everybody has a costume. Everybody has a process. And it's just, are you aware of what you have? Are you aware of what the process is that you're taking? Are you aware of what you're wearing? Because it is a costume. And it's not a value judgment of good or bad. And if your costume is bad enough, then you don't have one. So the next year, Sean McKinney turned up to the festival and he was going to compete. And he came into the preliminary round of judging, and he had on ripped up blue jeans and a white t-shirt, and he also had a garment bag slung over his shoulder with a couple hangers in it. And he went over to the side and he put down his garment bag and he unzipped it and he took out a pair of ripped up blue jeans and a white t-shirt, and he proceeded to change from his ripped up blue jeans into these other ripped up blue jeans and his white t-shirt into the other white t-shirt. And it wasn't a joke, though. It maybe sounds like a funny little instigation or political commentary about the judging system or who the judges were. But it wasn't. It was sincere. It was really, these are the ripped up blue jeans I want to wear for this performance. He was so specific. He knew himself so well. He was so intentional. He was so conscious with that choice. And I remember talking to his mother about it many years later. I mean, she said he really picked out those specific jeans and ripped them in a certain way. He wanted it to look a certain way. He had a vision in his head. And so, of course, the costume was quite different than what other people were wearing. And then in that way, it was street clothes, and it had all these other connotations that the judges at the time couldn't wrap their heads around. So they said, oh, he doesn't have a costume. He's just wearing normal clothes, or whatever that means to them. But I never forgot about that Sean was so conscious and so intentional with his idea that he carried an extra set of blue jeans and white t-shirt in a garment bag, like out of respect for his work. And I thought that was such a nice idea about that you can be that conscious. And a couple other comments that come on from this idea of the costume while we're talking about it is, I remember too being of that same generation as Sean McKinney, and wanting to not wear, at the time it was like a vest, like you should wear a colorful vest and a button-up shirt and dress pants and some shiny black shoes. And I remember thinking, yeah, this is not me. This is not who I am. This is not what I want to express on stage. And I always had this idea with my juggling that I wanted the objects to be more in focus, that I, as the performer, didn't want to wear a brightly colored vest because I didn't want to take that much attention away from what the objects were doing. Because when I was performing, I like to think that the objects had more value visually than me as a personality or a character. At one point, that's some stuff I was working with. And so I remember wearing maybe more contemporary clothing. But in these different situations, it's kind of funny. The contemporary clothes, like you could say blue jeans or t-shirts or whatever, if we stick with the Sean McKinney idea, it actually sticks out more, right? Like to the judges, it stuck out so much that the judges said, in Sean's case, well, you don't have a costume. And it's actually funny, I wanted to have the clothing disappear, actually. But in one way, I should have just worn the colorful vest and the shiny black shoes, because then people wouldn't think about it, right? That's what was expected at that time. That's what you should wear. And so in that way, I should have just stuck with what people expected, and then they would have just seen it and they said, oh, yep, he's got a costume. And then you don't think about it anymore consciously in the mind of the observer. Whereas what I was wearing was not the normal thing, and then it made people stop and look at it even more, even though I was trying to blend in. And that's also another thing that was related to the music we were using, which is that, again, at the time, you're wearing this colorful vest and the button-up shirt with the collar, and you should also juggle to kind of jazz music that has no lyrics. Remember that was a thing when I started out juggling? And I remember thinking, wow, this jazz music, I asked somebody at one point, I said, why are we using this jazz music with no lyrics? And they said, well, lyrics, it's too distracting to the audience. They'll start to listen to what the words mean, and then they're not going to be able to see the juggling. But also, jazz music it's back from the period of vaudeville, or historically that's what jugglers would juggle to back in the day, or whatever. That's what this one person said to me. But I distinctly remember thinking, back in the day when jazz music was invented, it wasn't like historical music, it was contemporary of the time, right? Like jazz music was like, wow, jazz music, it's the new hot, hip happening thing. And so I thought, okay, but if I should really kind of emulate this tradition or work with this tradition of juggling, and again, what they were wearing wasn't this kind of historical costume, it was clothing of the time. And that's why Sean and myself and a few of our contemporaries in our crew, we started juggling to pop music, and we started to wear clothing that was of our time. We started to have music, and pop music had lyrics, and it had a certain sort of structure and rhythm and chorus, verse, bridge kind of structure that we worked with our juggling, and it was of a certain length of time that was different than jazz music that we started off juggling to, or were supposed to juggle to in the culture we grew up in. And so again, that kind of points out to me this idea of having this conscious relationship to what we're doing, these habits that we've developed, these traditions that we've developed. Okay, you wear this and you look like this, and then you have music that's like this. But if you actually dig down deep enough and you say, but why? Why are we doing things like this? Then you start to understand, oh, it's to kind of try to copy the past, or not copy, but have a relationship to the past. And like, well, if we're going to have a relationship to the past, people were using jazz music because it was contemporary of their time, and they were dressing in these clothes because it was contemporary of their time. So I'm going to also be contemporary of my time. It's just one little idea about having, again, uncovering something that was intuitive and bringing it into consciousness and having some sort of result in a process with that. So the last thing I'd like to say for now in this section is that I believe creativity is not mysterious. There's this romantic notion that creativity comes from the heavens somehow, and you're waiting to be struck in the head with a bolt of lightning from the gods of art or whatever, creativity or inspiration. we could say. And this romantic idea also that you're just as a creator, you're just sitting there and you're just an open book, blank slate, and you're just waiting for this bolt of lightning to strike you in the head so that you can get the great idea. But I don't believe in that at all. I think that creativity is exactly like technique. So if you pick up 7 clubs for the first time ever in your life and you're going to do 7 club cascade, you would be pretty silly, I think, to think that the first time you throw all 7 clubs, you're not going to drop one at least. Like, we would never have that expectation of, okay, I'm going to do 7 clubs now for the first time, so that's going to go perfectly. And yet, there is some sort of assumption that, again, because creativity is supposed to be mysterious, that the first time you try to make a trick, or the first time you try to make an act, or the first time you try to make a show, that's the one shot you get, and it has to be perfect at the end of that. And this can be reflected, this can be seen even today in a lot of the circus schools around the world, where it's a 3-year program. The students go and they have 3 years of education. And sure, generally in most schools, like every week or every 2 weeks, you'll do a presentation at the end of the week on a certain theme. But that presentation, it's not the same as making an act, which is the task usually at the end of the 3rd year. So the students should make this act one time in the 3-year process with like all the way full out with the costume and music and lights. And then that performance should kind of be perfect. Or at least that's the internal pressure that the students put on themselves. I mean, but the school, the culture too. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, it's your last final statement of the school, your 3 years, and you're gonna just do this amazing thing. And it's like, many times I think this performance that's at the end of the 3 years, you should just do it at the end of the 1st year, or at the beginning of the 1st year actually, and then keep working on it for 3 years. That's how it's gonna actually be amazing. And I know there's a lot of schools who give tasks like that this ending act can be done at different points throughout the 3-year process. But again, it's still like at the end of the 3 years, it's the full thing with the full costume and the music and the lights and the choreography and the time to have that sort of process. Of course, don't get me wrong, it goes back to what's the goal of the school. And the goal of many schools isn't just to have an act at the end of 3 years, it's to have this entire experience, this entire body of educational, different sort of subjects and ideas. So I totally get that it's not just like, hey, we're just going to make acts here. It's not an act creation factory. But this idea that creativity is practiced in a different way than technique is something that I've tried to embody in my own work, where I practice creativity just as much as I practice my 7 club cascade. And through repetition of creating tricks, okay, today I'm just going to make a trick once a day. That doesn't mean you have to make a good trick once a day. It just means you make a trick. It's the same thing with 7 clubs. You don't have to get your personal best record with as many catches as you can every single day. But you put in the work, and maybe some days are better than others. It's the same thing. If you make up a trick, maybe some days it's better than others. But you're practicing the process of how to be creative. And this comes from the last story I'll say for now, which is, again, an experience I had when I was younger that I'm so grateful that I had. I was working in the Jérôme Thomas company in Paris, and in the mornings we had periods of time a few hours to work on our own practice, and then in the afternoon we would work on creating the show together. And I remember every day we would come in and juggle from 9 to 12, we would all be in our own corner, working on our own tricks, whatever was interesting to us at the time, our own techniques. And this one guy would come in, and he would change into his yoga clothes or workout clothes, whatever, and he would stretch and do yoga. He would meditate for a good 2 hours or more every single morning. So like 9 to 11, he would just come in, and man, he would do breathing exercises and just really go deep into his body and warming up and stretching and preparing. And after he was done with this ritual every morning, a really quite lengthy ritual, deeply involved, he would gather, he would take his three white silicone balls, and he would walk to the middle of the room, and he would just open up his shoulders and just put his head up, and he would stand there and close his eyes and hold the balls. And some days he would start juggling, and he would juggle, who knows, 5 minutes and then stop. Maybe he would juggle for an hour and then stop. But other days he would just go and stand there, and after all the work to warm up, and then he wouldn't even throw a single ball, and he would just walk away. He would just leave the room. And so this went on for 2 months. And finally I got up the courage, and one day I just asked him, I said, hey, I noticed sometimes in the morning you'll do this warm up, and then you'll go stand in the middle of the room, and then you won't juggle and you leave. So I just wondered, where do you go? And he said, well, every day I get up and I prepare my body, I prepare my mind, I'm ready, and I go to the middle of the room and I wait and see if I'm inspired. And if I'm inspired, I catch it, I catch that energy, and I start working, I start juggling and creating, but I never know how long it's gonna last. Sometimes it's for 5 minutes, and sometimes it's for a long time, maybe an hour, and it's just amazing. But other days, I'll go and I'll stand in the middle of the room, and I'm ready, and I'm there, and just nothing comes. I just don't feel anything. And so then I just have to leave, and it's okay. I just wait till the next day, and I prepare, and I'm ready, and we see what happens. And that's how I do my work. And I remember thinking to myself, and I was quite young, but at least I had the presence of mind. I thought to myself, it wasn't so much that it was tragic that when the inspiration didn't come for him, that was kind of okay. I was like, oh, I get it. Then you just leave and you wait till the next day. That kind of made sense to me. But I actually had this horror story scenario in my mind. I envisioned myself like 60 years old, and every single day I go to the center of the room and the inspiration comes, and I juggle for hours, and it's amazing. And then one day when I'm, 60 years old, I wake up and I do my 2 hours of sun salutations, and I go to the middle of the room and the inspiration doesn't come. And that just scared me to death. That image just scared me to death immediately. And I said to myself right then and there in Paris, I said, that's not going to happen to me no matter what. And from that day forward, it started this journey towards consciousness, towards being aware of my process, and having a technical approach to creativity as opposed to kind of a mysterious approach to creativity. So to wrap it all up, before we go to the next section, there's this idea that we're going to have consciousness in our work. We're going to have a process that's not mysterious. But what we're trying to create is something that is necessary, and we're not making anything that's random. We want to be intentional. We want to be conscious with our work. And necessity, making things that are necessary, we can make things that are, it can be necessary to have chaos. It can be necessary to have disorder. But the necessity, it has to be, again, on purpose. You have to embrace, chaos and disorder, and not just be stuck with them without a choice. Like the guy in Paris, he just didn't have a choice. He had a chaotic process, but he wasn't in control of it. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And so, sure, maybe my process isn't the most creative all the time. It's not always just going up and up and up in an amazing way. It's maybe more laborious. It's maybe longer, but it's more consistent, and it's always going forward. And I don't have to be afraid that one day I wake up and I don't know how to juggle anymore.